Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, December 7th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Senate GOP blocks massive military aid bill. So Senate Republicans blocked a motion to advance a massive $111 billion spending package that includes military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And they did this over a partisan dispute on border issues. They're still negotiating with the Democrats, and they said they would block this bill, and they did. So this effort failed in a vote of 49 to 51, with every Republican voting against the measure. Senator Bernie Sanders, who's an independent, technically, he does generally vote with Democrats, but he also voted no, and he did so due to his opposition to providing Israel with more unconditional military aid, as Israel is killing civilians on a massive scale in Gaza. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, he switched his vote to no when he realized the bill was going to fail, and he had to do that in order to be able to bring it for a vote in the future. And this needed 60 votes to pass, and so it failed. It didn't come close to that. And President Biden initially requested $106 billion, and the Senate Democrats added another $5 billion to that because, why not throw a few more billion in there? The legislation now includes $67 billion to spend on Ukraine. That includes military and economic aid, and I believe some humanitarian assistance is in there. And the purpose of this is to fuel the war for a whole nother year and prop up the Ukrainian government, even as there's all these clear signs that Ukrainian forces don't have a chance of breaking through. They just want to keep this war going. That's literally the purpose, just to keep it going, not for a Ukrainian victory, because they know that's not going to happen. They just want people to keep fighting and dying. So the $111 billion also includes billions to beef up security at the border, but Republicans are looking to change laws, asylum laws and things like that, to make it harder for migrants to get in. And doesn't seem like they're close to any deal. I'm not really sure of the behind the scenes stuff, but Schumer called this vote and they expected it to fail, and it did fail. So it's not clear what the next step is here. Unfortunately, I do think this is ultimately going to pass at some point, because these Republicans are blocking this for something kind of unrelated. And it's actually kind of funny because the Biden administration put the border security stuff in here. The idea was, we'll throw the Republicans a bone, throw some border funding in there. That way they have to give us our Ukraine money. But it turned into this whole fight. Anyway, earlier in the day, President Biden pleaded with Congress to pass more funding for the Ukraine war, claiming that if the U.S. aid dried up, Russia would invade NATO territory in Europe. So that's one of the arguments you hear, is that, if we don't help Ukraine, then Putin's going to roll into Eastern Europe, roll into Poland, and then then it's World War III. But it's just a completely ridiculous argument. There's no indication that Putin has his eyes on Eastern Europe or anything beyond Eastern Ukraine. But Biden said, quote, "Then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today, American troops fighting Russian troops," end quote. The president also took shots at Republicans for their stance on the border issue. He said, quote, "Petty, partisan, angry politics can't get in the way of our responsibility as a leading nation in the world, and literally the entire world is watching," end quote. So he came out and made that statement on TV in the middle of the day, and then a few hours later the Senate voted, and they still blocked it. So there's still a few weeks until they take their holiday recess, which is what Biden is saying they have to pass it before then. The White House told Congress that they're going to be out of Ukraine funding if they don't pass something by the end of the year. So they seem pretty desperate to get this money to keep this war going. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. is not considering leveraging aid to Israel. So Reuters reported on Tuesday that despite the soaring civilian deaths in Gaza, the Biden administration is not considering using any of the leverage that it has over Israel to get the Israeli military to change its tactics. And this is kind of reaffirming what we already know, but I think it's kind of important when we see U.S. officials say things like this to highlight it, because we see all these headlines about, they're talking about how they care about the U.S. is saying Israel must limit civilian casualties, but they're not actually putting any pressure on them. U.S. officials say that they're expressing concern privately and claim that Israel is listening, but the current campaign in South Gaza, where there are millions of displaced civilians, is no less brutal than the Israeli operations in the north. The U.S. has pointed to Israel allowing more aid trucks to enter Gaza as proof that Israel is listening, but the UN's top relief official, Martin Griffiths, has said that the situation in South Gaza is apocalyptic and it ends any possible. Basically, the Israeli operations right now have ended any possibility of meaningful humanitarian operations. So Gaza's health ministry has said over 16,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, 70% being women and children. And this mass slaughter of civilians has not caused the Biden administration to rethink support for the war. And the Reuters report said that the U.S. is stopping well short of measures that would force Israel to listen to the concerns about civilian casualties, such as restricting military aid. They're stopping well short of that idea. So instead, U.S. officials have maintained U.S. military aid to Israel is unconditional. The support has involved near daily weapon shipments, including thousands of massive bombs, the deployment of all this firepower to the region to show Israel that the U.S. has their back, special operations support, drone flights over Gaza, all sorts of support. And again, unconditional. Doesn't matter how many civilians they kill. There's no limit. One U.S. official claimed to Reuters that reducing military support for the onslaught would carry risks. This official said, quote, "You start lessening aid to Israel, you start encouraging other parties to come into the conflict, you weaken the deterrence effect, and you encourage Israel's other enemies," end quote. Israeli officials have made clear that they are not feeling any pressure to change their tactics. Ofer Falk, he is a foreign policy advisor to Netanyahu. He said, quote, "I must admit I sense that the prime minister feels zero pressure and that we will do whatever it takes to achieve our military goals," end quote. So all that talk is really for nothing. All right, so the next one here. UN Security Council to discuss Gaza after the UN chief invokes a rare rule. So this Antonio Guterres, who is the UN Secretary General, has invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter, which is a rare move. It's the first time he has done it, and he's been the head of the UN since 2017. And this rule allows the UN chief to bring a matter to the attention of the Security Council that he believes threatens international peace and security. And while invoking the rule, Guterres repeated his call for a humanitarian ceasefire. The Biden administration has rejected the idea of a ceasefire. They just have called for pauses, but now John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, again reiterated on Wednesday that we're against the ceasefire, that they don't want to use the C word. And the U.S. has blocked resolutions at the UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire. They eventually allowed one to pass that called for humanitarian pauses, but not a full ceasefire. Guterres and other UN officials have said that Israel's renewed onslaught has made relief efforts impossible. More aid trucks had been allowed into Gaza during the week-long truce that enabled the hostage releases, but the current Israeli operations have halted most aid deliveries. Guterres said the UN is simply unable to reach those in need in Gaza, and he noted that at least 130 UN employees have been killed by the Israeli bombardment, so it's up to 130 now. The last time I checked that, it was about 100. So UN officials have also said there's no safe place in Gaza, despite Israel's claim of establishing these safe zones, and Palestinians on the ground say that there's no safe place to evacuate. And in response to what Guterres did, invoking this article, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen accused the UN chief of supporting Hamas. He said, quote, Guterres' tenure is a danger to world peace. His request to activate Article 99 and the call for a ceasefire in Gaza constitutes support of the Hamas terrorist organization, end quote. All right, so the next one that we have here, the White House interns call Israeli actions in Gaza a genocide. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And it says that a group of more than 40 interns at the White House have signed a letter demanding President Joe Biden call for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The interns behind the letter, White House Interns for Palestine, said Biden had to reverse course in supporting Israel. The letter says that they can, quote, no longer remain silent on the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. We urge the Biden-Harris administration to call for a permanent ceasefire now, a release of all hostages, including Palestinian political prisoners, and to support a diplomatic solution that will put an end to the illegal occupation and the Israeli apartheid in accordance with international law and for a free Palestine, end quote. So it's more dissent from within, although I guess they're just interns, but I think this goes to show the big divide. If you look at the numbers, the polls, when it comes to young people, college age, in their 20s, they generally lean, more in this direction against supporting Israel, more pro-Palestine. Even people working at the White House, apparently. All right, so the next one here, how Israel is squeezing 1.8 million Palestinians into an airport-sized area. So this article is from Al Jazeera. And it's about this one safe zone that Israel has declared that apparently they want to push in all these Palestinians into, and it's a very small area. The Israeli military has asked Palestinian residents of Gaza to evacuate to a part of the town of Al-Mawasi in the south of the besieged strip, designating it as a safe space. The directive comes at a time when Israel has stepped up its bombings of southern Gaza, especially around the city of Khan Yunis, which the Israeli military claims is sheltering leaders of Hamas. But can the space be declared safe by Israeli authorities actually accommodate the more than 1.8 million Palestinians who have been forced to evacuate their homes since the outbreak of violence? So this area is small and narrow. It's about 0.6 miles wide and 8.7 miles long. It has been surrounded by Israeli settlements until the disengagement in 2005. And apparently this area is half the size of London's Heathrow Airport. And so it says they're just kind of trying to put it in perspective here. So the Heathrow Airport serves about 167,000 passengers a day. And this is an area that over 1 million people they're telling to go to. So, and if I was a Palestinian, I don't know if I would trust the Israelis, when they tell you to go somewhere and then some areas get bombed. If they want to pack them all into this small area, who knows what they might do after that. That's definitely got to be a concern for people that have been going from place to place that keeps getting bombed. All right, so the next one here, Israel's defense minister threatens military action in Lebanon. So Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Wednesday that Hezbollah must be pushed back from the Israeli border. And if it's not achieved through diplomatic means, Israel will take military action. So the comments suggest Israel is considering opening a second front in Lebanon beyond the cross-border strikes Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging since October 7th. According to a recent report from Axios, some U.S. officials are concerned that Israel might provoke Hezbollah to justify a wider war in Lebanon. The report said that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin had expressed concern in a phone call with Gallant in November about the risk of escalation on Israel's northern border. So it's important to keep in mind that U.S. officials are worried that it's Israel that's going to provoke a bigger war, a war in Lebanon. Gallant made the comments on Wednesday while visiting the northern coastal city of Nahariya. He said the Israeli government would not encourage the approximately 80,000 civilians who evacuated areas of northern Israel to return to their homes until Hezbollah is pushed back beyond the Litani River, which is 18 miles north of the Israel-Lebanon border in southern Lebanon. So at the end of the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war, UN Security Council Resolution 1701 established a demilitarized zone between the border and the Litani River, and that required Israeli forces to withdraw from southern Lebanon and Hezbollah to move north of the river. According to the Times of Israel, Gallant said that the best option would be to reach a diplomatic solution to agree on the enforcement of Resolution 1701, and that if that didn't happen, he said Israel would act with all the means at its disposal to push Hezbollah back through military action. And last month, Gallant made some pretty threatening comments toward the country of Lebanon, not just Hezbollah. He said that Israel could turn Beirut into Gaza. He said, quote, Hezbollah is dragging Lebanon to a possible war and making mistakes. What we can do in Gaza, we can also do in Beirut. Our pilots are sitting in their cockpits, their aircraft facing north, end quote. So definitely an area to keep an eye on, that volatile border area. I want to take this moment to mention again that it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com, and this is how we get by. This is how this show is possible, is through these fundraisers that we have to do to keep antiwar.com running. And we are entirely reliant on our readers because of keeping our independent, anti-war, non-interventionist editorial line. We don't attract many corporations or anything like that. We rely on individual readers and now listeners and viewers of this show. This is, again, the only way that this show can happen. So if you enjoy this and you have the means, please go to antiwar.com/donate, and you can see the different ways you can help us out. PayPal, credit card, cryptocurrency, special donations. You could set up a monthly donation. We have a lot of monthly donors. That's a big help. Anything you can afford to spare for us, we would really appreciate it. So to get this thing moving along so we can focus on our work. So again, antiwar.com/donate. All right, so the next one here, Israel greenlights full Jewish control march over the Temple Mount. So this article is from Haaretz, and it says that Israeli police have greenlit a far-right march rallying for full Jewish control over Temple Mount. So Israel's police has authorized far-right Jewish activists to march on the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem on Thursday evening to demand an end to the control by the Waqf, which is the Islamic endowment which administers the holy site. The activists are calling to restore full Jewish control over the Temple Mount and Jerusalem against Waqf control, and that has traditionally declared strong opposition to any Jewish religious expression there. The march, limited to 200 participants, is slated to follow the flag parade route through the Damascus Gate and the Muslim Quarter. So the flag parade is always very provocative. You see people chanting things like "Death to Arabs" in these marches, and these types of things always risk, especially now, really setting something off. And this demonstration, explicitly calling for Jewish control of Al-Aqsa. It's a very sensitive area, and keep in mind the Hamas attack on October 7th was called the Al-Aqsa Flood, and they said they started planning it in 2021 after Israeli forces stormed Al-Aqsa. It was really bad. Israeli police and were beating and tear gassing worshipers there. And, I forget all the details about control and all the rules at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it's very tightly controlled who can go there. And it's just been a very sensitive area for both sides. And, these provocative marches like this, again, especially now, could really, who knows what it could provoke. All right, so the next one here, Israeli raid kills 21 members of Al Jazeera reporter's family. So this article is from Al Jazeera. One of their reporters has lost a lot of family members again. So an Al Jazeera employee has lost 22 of his family members in an Israeli attack on the home in which they were sheltering in the Gaza Strip. The family members of Momen al-Sharafi, a correspondent for Al Jazeera Arabic, were killed early on Wednesday morning at Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. So even though I'm kind of talking more about what's going on in the south, there's still a lot of fighting between Israel and Hamas on the ground, it seems like, though the details are kind of hard to figure out. and they're still bombing, of course, up in the north as well. So al-Sharifa's parents, Mahmoud and Amina, his siblings and their spouses, as well as nephews and nieces, were among those killed. He told Al Jazeera that an explosive barrel hit his home, causing a deep crater in the ground. And none of the civil defense crews were able to reach the bodies. We are prevented from saying goodbye to our loved ones and are deprived of giving them a proper burial. So they're buried under the rubble, and they have no heavy machinery to dig people out that get that buried. So that's another one of the reasons why the death toll is much higher than the number, the 16,000 that the health ministry is putting out, because they're not accounting for all the people under the rubble. And if you remember, Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief for the Arabic site, his whole family, but he lost, I believe, his wife and kids in an airstrike, and just really horrific stuff. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. announces a $175 million weapons package for Ukraine. So the Biden administration on Wednesday announced this new weapons package as President Biden pleaded with Congress to authorize more spending on the proxy war. So I mentioned this in the earlier article about the Senate blocking that bill, but I'll read another quote here from Biden about this. This was his little plea that he made on TV. He said, quote, "This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday recess. Simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he can hope for and abandon our global leadership," end quote. So this weapons package, it includes AIM-9 and AIM-7 missiles for air defense, HIMARS ammunition, artillery rounds, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, TOW missiles, Javelin anti-tank missiles, more than 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition, vehicles to tow and haul equipment, demolition munitions, equipment to protect infrastructure, that's very vague, and then spare parts maintenance and all that. So they still have the money, what they call the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which lets the U.S. ship weapons directly from Pentagon stockpiles. By my count, they still have like over $4 billion left from the $6 billion that became available thanks to a Pentagon accounting error that they said they overvalued previous arms shipments, so it freed up all this money. And that's all they have left of what was authorized by Congress so far. So that's what they're using for this latest weapons package. The war must go on. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. is granted access to Sweden's military bases. So the U.S. and Sweden have signed a defense cooperation agreement that will grant the U.S. military access to bases across the Nordic country, as Stockholm has abandoned its centuries-old policy of neutrality. The Pentagon said the deal will allow U.S. forces to operate in Sweden, including the legal status of U.S. military personnel, access to deployment areas, and pre-positioning of military material. Swedish Defense Minister Pal Johnson inked the pact with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on Tuesday and said that it would create better conditions for Sweden to be able to receive support from the U.S. in the event of a war. So the deal comes as Sweden is still waiting for Turkey and Hungary to approve its NATO bid. The U.S. State Department said that the DCA with Sweden will apply seamlessly for when Sweden eventually joins NATO. So Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO together last year, but Turkey delayed the process over allegations that the Nordic countries supported the PKK. It's that Kurdish militant group that Turkey, as well as the EU and the US, consider a terrorist organization. They took credit for a recent bombing. I forget what city it was in. I want to say Istanbul, but that might not be right. But that was a recent bombing that they took credit for, and Turkey launched airstrikes in Syria in response. So their main gripes were with Sweden. So Turkey approved Finland's NATO bid earlier this year, still holding off on Sweden. You know, we expected it to happen in the fall earlier, you know, when Turkey's parliament reconvened, which I think was like in October, and they still haven't voted. And Erdogan said again on Wednesday, another thing he wants is that there's this big F-16 deal he's trying to make with the U.S. for the Turkey to purchase a bunch of F-16 fighter jets. And he wants that to go through at the same time, basically. The Biden administration supports it. There's been some opposition from Congress. The main opposition was from Bob Menendez, the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Well, he stepped down because of this corruption probe. He's been indicted for receiving bribes, basically, to help Egypt get weapons and stuff. So when that happened, Erdogan actually said, now's the chance, let's push through this arms deal, but it still hasn't gone through. So I'm not sure exactly what the holdup is on that, but eventually it's going to happen. Erdogan's going to sign off. Well, it's actually Turkey's parliament that needs to ratify Sweden's membership. And then Hungary is expected to follow once Turkey does it. That's what they did with Finland. But they have been critical of, well, they've been saying that the Swedish government has been too critical of the Hungarian government, like many EU countries have been, really targeting Orban and in their rhetoric and stuff. So they're just kind of holding out, I think, as long as Turkey does. But more U.S., this could lead to U.S. military bases in Sweden, just more U.S. military expansion. Seems like everywhere we look. All right, so the last one here, the White House okays arms sales to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So this article is from Kyle, again, at the Libertarian Institute. And it says that the White House approved 2 arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, totaling over $600 million. And the State Department announced a $583 million sale of RE-3A tactical airborne surveillance system modernization aircraft. And that means that this is equipment that they could use to modernize surveillance aircraft from the 1980s. So older planes that were built a few decades ago. And then the other sale is $85 million for the United Arab Emirates. So the surveillance thing is for the Saudis, and then this $85 million sale of radar systems is for the UAE. And, this is something, even though these sales might not seem like much, this is something that Biden would come under criticism for. I think right now with everything that's going on in Gaza, this is kind of being overlooked. But because the U.S. supported the Saudis and the UAE in this brutal war in Yemen that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians from 2015 until now, though there's been the ceasefire since April 2022, most of those civilians died due to starvation and disease caused by the war and blockade. So these always kind of come under scrutiny, arms sales to these two countries. And they also have a history of transferring weapons to Al-Qaeda in Yemen, who fight against the Houthis for the U.S.-backed coalition. So it's one of those instances where the U.S. ends up on the same side of Al-Qaeda against the Houthis. So we got to always remember that too. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. We've run one from Ted Snyder. It's unanimous. Ukrainian neutrality could have brought peace. A good article about Ukraine's negotiator from the Istanbul peace talks in March 2022. Basically said Russia just wanted neutrality. Everything else wasn't really that important, that the war could have ended, and that Boris Johnson went over there and told him, don't sign it. We don't want to sign a deal with Russia. One from Jonathan Cook, how Israel uses an AI program to obliterate Gaza. One from Nick Turse, Henry Kissinger, top U.S. diplomat responsible for millions of deaths, dead at 100. And Turse, he just had, not long before Kissinger's death, he had some new reports on things he was involved in Cambodia. One from Norman Solomon, how the U.S. has darkened the nuclear cloud over humanity. In our spotlight, what if the U.S. stopped arming Ukraine, by Connor O'Keefe. And that is everything for me for today. Again, if you can, please help us with our fundraiser, antiwar.com/donate. I appreciate everybody that has contributed so far. You could also help us out by sharing this show and telling your friends about antiwar.com. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.